The following story is a submitted personal narrative. Some elements may have been adapted or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance emotional storytelling. This is not a verified factual investigation, but a human experience shared to reflect feelings, healing, and emotional truth. Viewer discretion is advised. The following story is a submitted personal narrative. Some elements may have been adapted or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance emotional storytelling. This is not a verified factual investigation, but a human experience shared to reflect feelings, healing, and emotional truth. Viewer discretion is advised. It was the charger that brought the first, undeniable breach. A new, slim, black charging block lay forgotten on the marble countertop beside his travel coffee mug. It was not the charger for his work-issued encrypted phone, nor his personal device, nor his work laptop. This was smaller, proprietary, terminating in a connection Eleanor did not recognize. She picked it up, the plastic cool and oddly weighted in her palm, instantly registering that this was not merely a forgotten accessory. It was evidence of a device she did not know he owned, a device that had been intentionally concealed. The tension began to weave itself through her daily routine, transforming the familiar comfort of their spacious, quiet home into a cage. The house, usually a sanctuary of predictability, now felt like a stage setting for a play she hadn't been cast in. She couldn't shake the image of the 4 notebooks, the 2 now missing, and the strange, silent charger. Driven by a necessity she couldn't name, a chilling blend of fear and indignation, Eleanor found herself doing something she had never done in the 16 years of their marriage. She began to search. Julian's home office, a fortress of leather and glass, was usually inviolable. Today, its order felt like a challenge. She systematically went through drawers, checking behind books, under papers nothing overtly scandalous. Only the sterile detritus of corporate life, expense reports, glossy brochures for data centers, and reams of highly redacted printouts. But the search was not fruitless. Tucked into the false bottom of a decorative box containing spare cufflinks, she found it, a small, almost microscopic SD card. It was unlabeled, tucked neatly beneath a velvet lining. Holding the card, Eleanor felt the first true spike of dread. This wasn't about a fleeting affair. This felt dangerous, professional, and deeply clandestine. The secret messages weren't going to be love notes. They were going to be codes. Her technical skills, honed years ago in a forgotten career in library science, were adequate enough for the task. She carefully inserted the SD card into her old, rarely used personal laptop, ensuring she bypassed any potential security traps on Julian's devices. The card contained only one folder, labeled simply Project Chimera. Inside, there were dozens of text files, all seemingly random strings of numbers and letters, interspersed with short, cryptic sentences. File 04, *alpha vector confirmed. Deliver package C40, location 34.0522N, 118.2437W standard window applies, File 11, the Red King is moving the pawn. Initiate standard protocol 7 gamma. Ensure 0 visibility, File 23, receipt acquired from designated supplier. Verify the weight of the shadow before deployment, The language was military, corporate, or perhaps a bizarre amalgam of both. It felt like a low-grade spy novel, yet it was undeniably real, sitting on a tiny piece of plastic in her husband's cufflink box. Eleanor reread the files, her mind struggling to impose logic onto the chaos. Los Angeles coordinates, Red King, shadow weight. None of it made sense, yet it painted a picture of calculated, high-risk activity entirely divorced from the bland, tedious reality of data security audits he described. The sheer volume of files suggested this had been ongoing for a considerable time. Her investigation escalated from tentative curiosity to focused, compulsive pursuit. She began to cross-reference his past travel itineraries, which she still kept meticulously logged for tax purposes. Julian would say he was in Chicago for an encryption seminar. The files showed coordinates pointing to a specific, nondescript industrial park outside of Des Plaines. He claimed to be in London for a week of board meetings. The files detailed precise surveillance instructions for a location near the docks. The work trips were not the destination, they were the cover. This realization that her husband's professional life, the very cornerstone of their financial stability and his identity, was a massive, elaborately maintained facade was a pattern interrupted seismic proportions. It forced her to reevaluate every rushed phone call, every vague explanation, every late arrival. She recalled Julian's almost pathological need for privacy regarding his computer, his refusal to discuss specifics, chalking it up, until now, as professional discretion. Now it looked like evasion. The anxiety transformed her sleep into a fitful, restless process. She would wake up at 3 a.m., the house silent and vast, the image of Julian's smooth, practiced smile haunting her. The doubt was paralyzing. Was she overreacting? Had she stumbled onto a highly classified, legitimate Black Ops side of his security work that she was never meant to see? Or was he fundamentally involved in something illicit, perhaps even criminal? The distinction was terrifyingly blurred. Eleanor dedicated the next 2 days to trying to decipher the files. She started with the coordinates, plugging them into Google Maps. They invariably led to safe, publicly accessible places, the back entrance of major museums, specific parking garages near government buildings, or the loading bays of logistics companies. They were dead drops, exchange points, or observation posts, but the language remained opaque. She needed a key, a Rosetta Stone, something that would link the Red King to the Shadow 8. Her breakthrough came not from specialized decryption software, but from a moment of sheer exhaustion and accidental recognition. She was reviewing File 23 again, asterisk receipt acquired from designated supplier. Verify the weight of the shadow before deployment, asterisk the word receipt looked odd. It was capitalized, standing out from the rest of the message structure. She noticed the pattern. In several of the most complex messages, certain common words were capitalized: receipt, weight, shadow, crown, alphabet. These capitalized words, she realized, were not part of the message content. They were indicators. They were keys to a modified Vigenère cipher, a shifting encryption method. Julian, in his meticulous, professional arrogance, had established a pattern code based on the day of the week the message was sent, cross-referenced with the third capitalized word in the corresponding file. The system was brilliant in its simplicity and reliance on external, seemingly meaningless variables. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, snapping the final brittle thread of her denial. This was not the work of a man dealing with corporate finance data. This was the work of a highly trained operative, a spy, an intelligence broker, or perhaps a professional criminal. The gravity of the revelation made the blood drain from her face, leaving her hands clammy and shaking as she finally began the painstaking process of decryption. She started with File 04, the one detailing the alpha vector delivery. Julian had been gone on a Tuesday. The third capitalized word in a related file was crown. Using the Vigenère grid and crown as the keyword, the scrambled message began to yield. The decoded message was simple, stark, and horrifying. Asterisk the asset is confirmed operational. The target package contains untraceable funds and a locator beacon. Ensure extraction is clean. If compromised, initiate immediate incineration of the package and terminate communication with handler X asterisk. Untraceable funds locator beacons. Incineration. Termination. Eleanor slowly pulled away from the laptop, the glowing screen illuminating the sudden pallor of her face. The truth was vast, cold, and utterly terrifying. Her husband, Julian Vance, the mild-mannered, successful data security consultant, was not just traveling for work. He was traveling for missions. His work trips were not audit schedules. They were operational timelines. The secret messages were not cryptic notes of a lover. They were instructions for espionage, perhaps even assassinations. She looked around the house she had so lovingly maintained, the expensive furniture, the imported artwork, the perfectly manicured garden, all of it bought and paid for with the proceeds of activities she could not begin to comprehend, activities that placed them both firmly within the crosshairs of a world she didn't know existed. She had been living inside a meticulously constructed dollhouse, protected by a glass dome of willful ignorance, and now the glass was shattered. Eleanor Vance, the quiet woman who believed in the integrity of quarterly reports and the reliability of flight schedules, finally saw everything. She saw the true nature of Julian's wealth, the source of his haunted exhaustion, and the lethal secrecy behind the mild blue of his eyes. She was no longer just his wife. She was a witness, potentially an accessory, and perhaps, unknowingly, a target. The weight of that knowledge settled on her shoulders, heavy and metallic, far colder than the hotel soap. Julian was due back in less than 18 hours. He would walk through that door, smile his tired, familiar smile, kiss her, and pretend that the silver suitcase contained nothing more than wrinkled shirts and mundane paperwork. But Eleanor knew better. She knew that in the next few hours, she had to make a choice that would determine whether she survived this sudden, terrifying clarity. She had to decide what to do with the decoded truth, the proof of her husband's life as a clandestine operator. The clock ticked loudly in the echoing silence of the office, counting down the minutes until the safe routine of her life exploded completely. She needed to understand the scope of the operation, where Julian was headed next, and why he had chosen to expose this piece of the puzzle, even inadvertently, to her. The key to the cipher was found, but the true identity of the Red King and the meaning of the shadow weight remained locked away, threatening to consume them both. This is merely the first layer, the peeling back of the professional veneer. The real danger lies in what Julian's current mission entails and who exactly is hunting the man who claims to be a security consultant. The clock is ticking, and Eleanor must now move from observer to player, navigating the treacherous terrain her husband engineered. To survive, she must analyze the decoded intel and prepare for the moment Julian walks back through that door. The full terror of Project Chimera awaits her, demanding she understand the next step in this desperate game. The meticulous quiet of the apartment, a fortress once built on shared understanding, had curdled into a vacuum of anticipation. Eleanor now lived suspended in that charged stillness, every breath measured, every surface scrutinized. The initial tremor of doubt had transformed into a seismic instability, restructuring the foundation of her reality not through sudden, violent upheaval, but through the slow, insidious erosion of trust. She was no longer simply suspicious. She was a curator of anomalies, cataloging the minuscule fissures in Michael's carefully constructed facade. His work trips, the very axis around which their life had revolved, had ceased being necessary evils and had become strategic withdrawals. The pattern was immutable, yet increasingly baffling. 36 hours in Geneva, ostensibly negotiating pharmaceutical futures. 48 hours traversing the logistical labyrinth of a Shanghai port deal. 24 hours for an emergency consultation in Dubai regarding currency stability. They were ghost journeys, high-speed traversals of global geography where the only tangible evidence left behind was a refreshed passport stamp and an exhaustion that seemed too deep, too calculated, for simple jet lag. Eleanor had begun her comprehensive analysis with the luggage. Michael's titanium carry-on, a vessel that had logged more air miles than a commercial pilot, was her first major text. She examined the wheel wells, the lining, the faint, nearly invisible scuff marks on the shell. She wasn't searching for lipstick or perfume. She was searching for asterisk context asterisk. And context in this highly sanitized operational theater was found in contradiction. On his last return from what he labeled a routine security audit in Frankfurt, she found not the expected dust of European cobblestones or the fine grit of high-speed rail travel, but a residue, almost imperceptible, clinging to the innermost fold of the zippered compartment lining. It was a faint crystalline powder, granular and stark white. She had meticulously collected a pinch on a piece of adhesive tape, sealing it away. Frankfurt was banking and logistics. This substance felt industrial or perhaps geological. It defied the narrative of spreadsheets and boardrooms. It was the first hard, physical evidence that the topography Michael described was vastly different from the one he had actually traversed. The deeper she burrowed, the more the complexity of his operation revealed itself. She began cross-referencing expense reports against satellite weather data. Why, for instance, did a charge for specialized rain gear appear on a receipt from Singapore dated July 14th, when official meteorological records confirmed a week of unblemished, arid heat? Why did a dinner receipt from a secluded steakhouse in the financial district of London, filed meticulously under client entertainment, feature a charge for a specific vintage Bordeaux wine Michael detested and a single portion of a shellfish dish, implying a solo meal when his justification for the cost was the presence of 3 high-profile, influential German counterparts? These discrepancies were not mistakes. They were breadcrumbs leading into a forest of deliberate misdirection. The true nature of the secret messages became clear. They were not transmissions he received, but the carefully calibrated omissions he made. The secret was the gap between the verifiable truth and the narrated fiction. Eleanor started maintaining an exhaustive log, transforming a spare bedroom into what resembled a small, private intelligence center. She had large, foam core boards where she plotted Michael's movements using colored string, blue for official itinerary, red for anomalous evidence. The board was now dominated by the tangled, chaotic web of the red string, connecting cities that made no logical sense together. A 4-hour layover in Anchorage on a route from Zurich to Tokyo. A repeated, yet unexplained, overnight stay in a tiny, nondescript hotel near the Czech border, always booked under a variation of his first name, always paid for in cash. Her life became a performance of normalcy, a high-stakes, domestic theater production where she was the only one aware of the audience watching her every move, the imagined eyes of Michael's real handlers, or perhaps the silent confirmation of her own creeping madness. She would sit across from him at the breakfast table, pouring coffee, discussing banal neighborhood gossip, all while internally dissecting the minute tremor in his left hand when he picked up the newspaper. The specific cologne he wore, a subtle, witty scent he usually reserved only for major anniversaries, now deployed casually after a 3-day absence. The pressure was mounting, not just from the lack of answers, but from the intellectual insult of the obfuscation. Michael was intelligent, meticulously organized, and fundamentally adept at creating perfect camouflage. His lies were architectural masterpieces, built to withstand scrutiny. This realization was the second, more profound hook. It wasn't just infidelity she was confronting. It was a deeply sophisticated, operational double life that required resources and coordination far beyond the scope of mere personal betrayal. Then came the metadata. Eleanor, possessing a sharp mind for logistics that had been dulled by years of comfortable domesticity, began to apply sophisticated tools to the limited digital residue Michael left behind. She examined the geotagging data on the few random photos he occasionally sent her, generic shots of airport lounges or hotel room views as proof of his location. The breakthrough was unnerving in its subtlety. A photo allegedly taken from the 45th floor of a high-rise in Singapore showed, in the far corner of the frame, a reflection in the window glass. When magnified and digitally enhanced, the reflection was not of the expected urban density, but a specific, low-slung, distinctive water tower structure unique to the suburban industrial zone near Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. The timestamp on the photo was locally plausible for Singapore, but the visual evidence contradicted the temporal context. He had manipulated the timestamp, but failed to notice the reflection's geographical anchor. This was a professional, targeted manipulation of evidence, a deliberate falsification of his position. The implication was shattering. He wasn't just somewhere else. He was deliberately pretending to be somewhere specific, using the pretense as a form of operational cover. The tension became a physical entity in the house. Eleanor started to sleep less, her nights dedicated to charting the constellation of his deceit. She listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren of an ambulance, filtering out the noise to focus on the deep, rhythmic breathing of her husband sleeping soundly beside her, or was it sleeping? Was the stillness of his form, the measured rise and fall of his chest, another element of the performance? She found herself fixating on one recurring element that defied interpretation: the notebooks. Michael maintained 3, all identical, leather-bound journals. One was labeled Domestic Finances, the second Client Notes, and the third was simply blank, stored in the deepest pocket of his carry-on. She had examined the first two exhaustively. They were precisely what they claimed to be, banal and professional. But the third, the blank one, held a strange weight. It was unused, its pages pristine, yet it showed signs of travel. The corners slightly softened, a faint crease running down the center, as if it had been pressed tightly against something else for long periods. She realized the notebook wasn't meant to hold writing, it was meant to hide something. After he left for what he called a low-stakes exploratory mission to Lisbon, she took the blank notebook. She brought it into the high light of her analysis room. She pressed, she peeled, she bent the spine backward, testing the adhesive. Nothing. It seemed entirely, frustratingly empty. Then she noticed the microscopic perforation. Along the inner edge of the spine, where the leather met the first page, there was a series of tiny, symmetrical holes, visible only under magnification. They were not binder holes, they were perforations left by a machine, perhaps an industrial staple or a specialized stitching tool. She slowly, carefully began to separate the leather casing from the paper block using a thin, surgical scalpel she had acquired. It was a painstaking, hours-long process, requiring the steady hand of a jeweler. When the paper block finally separated, she held her breath, expecting a hidden compartment, a micro SD card, or a folded note. Instead, pressed flat against the inside of the leather lining was a thin, high-resolution photographic slide, smaller than her thumbnail, meticulously taped down with an archival, acid-free adhesive that suggested professional handling. It was not a digital image. It was analog, demanding projection. She had anticipated a message, a code, a name, or perhaps even a visual confirmation of another woman. What she held was infinitely more confounding and terrifying. She set up a small, improvised projector using an old lens and a focused halogen lamp. The image flared onto the wall of her spare room, large and stark. It was an architectural schematic, not of a house, not of an office building, but a highly complex, multi-layered blueprint of an underground facility. The drawing was replete with cryptic annotations, pressure valves marked in Cyrillic, ventilation shafts leading to level 5, and intersecting lines labeled restricted access, biocontainment zone. The image was professional, cold, and entirely removed from the world of financial consulting and global logistics Michael claimed to inhabit. The revelation hit her with the force of physical trauma. This was not a map to a lover's rendezvous. This was a map to an operational base, a fortress of secrecy rooted in something far more dangerous than domestic deceit. The work trips were not travel, they were cover operations. The pharmaceutical futures, the port deals, the currency stability consultations, all elaborate fictions designed to justify access to specific coordinates under specific pretenses. She traced the name faintly printed in the corner of the schematic, a single, unfamiliar acronym *, Project Chimera *. Below the acronym, a series of coordinates that, when quickly cross-referenced using her secured laptop, pointed not to Geneva or Shanghai, but deep into a remote, mountainous region bordering 3 politically unstable nations. Michael was not just cheating on her. He was immersed in a world of high-stakes, international subterfuge, the depth and purpose of which she could only begin to imagine. The secret messages were not romantic poetry or cryptic instructions for meeting, but logistical anchors for a deeply guarded, subterranean reality. The silence of the room was deafening. Eleanor leaned back against the wall, the image of the biocontainment zone glowing ominously before her. Her initial fear of being betrayed by a partner was now replaced by the paralyzing terror of recognizing that her partner was fundamentally a stranger, entangled in secrets that could, quite literally, rearrange the geopolitical landscape and, potentially, erase their entire life together. She looked at the string board, at the confluence of red lines linking Frankfurt residue, Rotterdam reflections, and now, Project Chimera *. The pieces were connecting, but the full picture was terrifyingly opaque. She still needed to know the *y*, the *who*, and most importantly, the when of his next move. The realization brought a sudden, cold determination. She had seen the truth, ugly and vast. Now she had to navigate it. She knew Michael would return in 3 days, refreshed and ready to resume his masterful performance of the loving, tired husband. She had 3 days to study the schematic, to understand the gravity of Project Chimera, and to plan her response. She had seen everything, but understanding it required immersion into the cold, sharp reality of his secret life. The blank notebook, now separated from its horrifying contents, lay on the desk. Eleanor picked up a pen and, with a hand that had finally stopped shaking, began to annotate the schematic, marking the coordinates, and preparing for the final, inescapable confrontation with the man who claimed to love her, but who lived a life rooted entirely in profound, global deception. The escalation had reached a terrifying plateau, leaving her stranded between the quiet comfort of her old life and the catastrophic implications of the new truth. The stage was set, and the waiting was the final, agonizing act of preparation. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through her hands was not born of cold or fear, but of an overwhelming, corrosive certainty. The sheer weight of the discovered truth, now organized and meticulously cross-referenced on a constellation of sticky notes and digital spreadsheets, had begun to press down on the very architecture of her reality. She was not merely navigating suspicion. She was charting a complex logistical conspiracy executed with the precision of a corporate hostile takeover. Julian's life, the life they shared, was not merely compromised by an indiscretion. It was a beautifully engineered edifice built solely to conceal a foundation of sustained, years-long deceit. The first coded message, the one scrawled on the back of the dry cleaning receipt initially dismissed as absent-minded doodling, had proven to be the key, the Rosetta Stone to an entire language of obfuscation. It wasn't a standard cryptogram. Julian had employed a simple, yet brilliant, method, a substitution cipher key to the fluctuating exchange rate of the euro against the yen on the day the note was written. It required a level of financial focus that only reinforced the meticulous nature of his double existence. When decoded, the message didn't contain poetic declarations of illicit love, which might have been easier to process. Instead, it was an itinerary, stark and cold. ATL 20 o'clock. Verify the transfer parameters. The usual arrangement for the transfer of the vintage Bordeaux. Vintage Bordeaux, a business term she had heard him use countless times in hushed phone calls relating to a fictitious client in Strasbourg. Now she knew the Bordeaux was not wine, and the transfer parameters were not financial. They were the highly sensitive arrangements for crossing physical and temporal boundaries, masking the emotional transaction occurring on the other side. This was not a lover. This was a handler, a coordinator, someone deeply entrenched in the maintenance of Julian's secondary narrative. Clara traced the faint ink of the receipt with a trembling finger, the scent of stale detergent clinging to the paper. The deeper she dug into the historical data, the forgotten expense reports, the discarded parking stubs from airports Julian claimed were mere layovers, the archived junk emails she had retrieved from his old laptop after resetting the password, the clearer the pattern emerged. The trips had escalated, not just in frequency, but in duration, often extending by exactly 36 hours beyond the plausible requirements of the reported business objective. He had always claimed these extensions were due to unexpected regulatory delays or mandatory client dinners. Now she understood those 36 hours were not delays. They were the calculated, stolen hours of his authentic life, lived elsewhere. The conflict of her investigation intensified, morphing from a hunt for truth into a battle against profound intellectual fatigue. She hadn't slept soundly in days, the glow of the monitor illuminating the shadows under her eyes, mirroring the dark circles around the truth she was uncovering. Every click of the mouse was a breach, every successful password guess a violation of the sacred trust that had once defined their decade-long relationship. She felt dirty, a thief in her own home, yet the alternative, the willful, blind acceptance of his intricate lie, was a psychological annihilation she could no longer afford. The open loops were expanding, multiplying like cells in a cancerous growth. Who was the recipient of these coded logistics? The use of commercial jargon suggested someone professional, possibly someone connected to Julian's industry, but perhaps that was merely another layer of camouflage. Why the elaborate financial code if the motive was purely emotional? And most terrifyingly, the discovery that the Strasbourg trips, which Julian claimed necessitated an overnight stay in Europe, frequently originated not from their local hub, but from a smaller, regional airport 200 miles away, a detail meticulously omitted from all shared calendars and travel confirmations. He had created a travel schedule asterisk within asterisk his travel schedule, disappearing entirely before he even officially left their city. She began compiling a meticulous ledger, comparing the real-time flight tracking data gleaned from cross-referencing airport Wi-Fi login times and deleted booking confirmations with the official expense reports submitted to his company. The discrepancies were staggering. A flight claimed from Boston to London was actually a flight from the regional airport to Asheville. The claimed reason, a high-stakes merger negotiation. The actual reason, Clara was beginning to deduce, was an entirely different type of negotiation, one of sustained domesticity and deep, personal investment. The financial strain on Julian's personal accounts, hidden cleverly under layers of high-interest savings transfers and early investment withdrawals, suggested that this second life was not cheap. It was, financially speaking, a second mortgage. Clara leaned back in the worn leather chair, the leather squeaking in protest, a sound that seemed deafening in the pre-dawn silence. She looked at the wall, now entirely papered with the evidence receipts tacked next to flight maps, decoded messages pinned below corresponding dates. The magnitude of the deception was physically debilitating. It wasn't just that he was seeing another woman. It was that he had maintained the infrastructure of a separate life with the same level of commitment he had once dedicated to building their life together. This wasn't a casual affair. This was an alternative marriage, running parallel to hers. The pattern interrupts in his behavior, the sudden, inexplicable shifts in mood, the gifts bought with an almost desperate lavishness following a trip, the moments of intense, almost forced intimacy now clicked into place. They weren't symptoms of guilt. They were the necessary psychological resets required to manage the profound cognitive dissonance of living to simultaneous truths. He was not merely cheating. He was acting a role, a performance of fidelity so convincing that it had fooled her for years. The re-engagement point, the moment of renewed, chilling clarity, hit her when she realized the chronology of the London regulatory meeting from 3 years prior. That was the week she had been rushed to the hospital for a minor surgical emergency, an event he had missed, claiming he was trapped by crucial negotiations in a time zone 12 hours ahead, unable to secure an immediate flight. She had accepted the excuse, finding solace in his frantic, remorseful phone calls. Now, looking at the decrypted airline data, she saw the truth. His flight that week was only 3 hours long, domestic, landing in a city only 2 states away. He was not trapped on the other side of the world. He was simply trapped on the other side of a lie, and he had chosen the lie over her moment of crisis. The realization was a sudden, violent tearing of emotional scar tissue, leaving a raw, aching wound. This knowledge fueled her final, desperate push into his digital shadow. She needed the location. She needed the asterisk where asterisk to confirm the asterisk who asterisk. Julian, ever cautious, had never texted an address, only coded itineraries. However, His travel agency, which he booked through a separate, encrypted corporate portal, provided one final, critical slip. A specific hotel name kept appearing on the detailed receipts for ground transportation, not a chain hotel, but a boutique establishment named the Heron's Rest. She ran the name. The Heron's Rest was not a hotel at all. It was a private residential compound nestled deep in the wooded hills of rural Vermont, far from any major financial hub or airport, maintained by a very discreet property management group. The sheer audacity of the lie took her breath away. He wasn't meeting clients, he was maintaining a home. Clara cross-referenced the property's latitude and longitude, found through archived real estate listings, with a set of seemingly random calendar entries Julian had kept labeled inventory check. These checks always correlated exactly with his international travel dates. She zoomed in on the satellite images. The compound was expansive, featuring a main house and a newly built, architecturally striking annex work that would have required significant time, investment, and consistent oversight. Julian, who claimed to hate construction projects, had clearly overseen this entire operation. Then came the climax, the great revelation that crystallized the nature of his betrayal beyond mere infidelity. In a deep dive into the property management group's public filings, a level of diligence only a woman teetering on the edge of sanity could achieve, Clara found the legal ownership documents for the Heron's Rest compound. The ownership was split, held in a joint tenancy trust. The name listed alongside Julian's redacted trust initials was not an alias or a shell company. It was a person, a woman named Eleanor Vance. The shock was immediate and physical, a cold wave washing over her. Eleanor Vance, not a mistress, not a colleague, but a full partner in a financial and real estate venture. The legal formality of the arrangement suggested a commitment far exceeding clandestine meetings in conference rooms. This was a parallel life, documented and legally binding, a complete rejection of their shared narrative. The discovery wasn't just that Julian had another woman. It was that he had another life, another financial commitment, another potential heir to a fortune built on shared lies. And then, a tiny detail on the ownership document screamed louder than the rest. Eleanor Vance's listed home address was the same address as the Heron's Rest compound, but the document also required a secondary emergency contact. That secondary contact was a physician's office, a pediatrician, listed in the same small Vermont town. The sudden, terrifying implication of a child of full, complete family unit Julian had been fostering under the guise of Q4 projections and vintage Bordeaux transfers caused the meticulously organized papers on her desk to blur. Clara's hands dropped to her lap, finally still. The sheer, overwhelming weight of this fully realized deception was too vast to be contained by rage or sorrow. It was a pure, cold recognition of absolute zero, the point where heat and light vanish. She had finally seen everything. The work trips were homecomings. The secret messages were household logistics. The woman was not a complication. She was the cornerstone of Julian's true existence. The quick payoff was the final, devastating realization that she was not fighting for her marriage anymore. She was fighting for her freedom, for the remnants of her dignity, and for justice against a man who had stolen years of her life and converted them into the capital for his other family. She was finished with research. She was finished with decoding. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for action had begun. She stood up, the chair scraping sharply on the wooden floor, the sound shattering the pre-dawn quiet. Her gaze swept over the complex diagram of his deceit, the maps, the receipts, the decoded itineraries leading straight to the Vermont woods. She needed an objective, professional intermediary. She needed a plan of extraction. She needed the names of the best forensic accountants and divorce attorneys in the state. The next flight Julian took would not be to Asheville or London. It would be straight into the eye of the storm she was about to unleash. The hour was late, suspended in the viscous silence that only descends upon an affluent neighborhood when its inhabitants believe themselves secure in their slumber and their carefully constructed deceptions. Eleanor stood in the subterranean vault of the house, a space David had always referred to as his climate-controlled wine cellar, the air thick with the faint, sweet decay of old Bordeaux and the metallic tang of fear that now clung to her own skin. She held the small, heavy silver key, the last piece of the cryptic puzzle, found hidden not in a dusty book or a loose floorboard, but surgically tucked into the lining of a tailor-made suit jacket, a garment he had claimed he had misplaced years ago. The realization that he had kept it so close, integrated into the very fabric of his presentation of stability, struck her with a fresh, sickening wave of nausea. The key was meant for the heavy, unmarked safety deposit box nestled behind a movable panel designed to look like a rack of vintage sauternes. Her hands were steady, unnervingly so, a testament to the months of calculated observation and emotional anesthesia she had employed to reach this final precipice. She inserted the key, feeling the satisfying, mechanical resistance before the heavy bolt gave way with a decisive asterisk thunk asterisk that echoed monumentally in the small, insulated space. As the door swung open, revealing the dark, tightly packed contents within, the last vestiges of doubt, the faint hope that she was merely an overly suspicious wife indulging a fleeting paranoia, evaporated entirely. What lay before her was not the evidence of a clandestine affair which, ironically, would have been a simpler, almost merciful betrayal, but the cold, hard proof of a life built on scaffolding of systemic, dangerous deceit. The box contained 4 items, a thick, encrypted external hard drive that hummed faintly even when disconnected. A passport with David's face, but a different, utterly mundane name, Daniel Everson, complete with stamps from territories he had vehemently denied ever visiting. A thin ledger bound, inexpensive, black leather, and a single photograph. Eleanor picked up the ledger first, the pages thin and brittle, covered not in standard accounting figures, but in a meticulously neat, almost elegant script that mirrored the coded messages she had painstakingly decoded over the past months. The red canary now revealed as a specific, highly confidential algorithm developed by David's firm, and the lighthouse coordinates as the exact geographic location of a competing offshore server farm targeted for industrial sabotage. The entries detailed payments, enormous sums transferring between shell corporations with names like Chimera Solutions and Janus Holdings, all funneling into an account that, frighteningly, bore both David's coded initial and hers, placing her unknowingly at the periphery of financial complicity. The dense script blurred before her eyes as she absorbed the chilling specifics. The dates of the work trips aligned perfectly with documented operational maneuvers. The 3-day stint in Singapore was not for negotiation, but for the transfer of intellectual property regarding proprietary microchip schematics. While the hurried weekend in Frankfurt was the finalization of a deal to destabilize the stock value of a rival through coordinated disinformation, a process that required a level of intricate, cold-blooded planning that redefined the men she thought she knew. This was not merely skirting the law. This was high-stakes, international economic warfare. And David was not a diligent executive, but a highly effective, deeply embedded operative, selling the very foundation of his company's future for personal gain that transcended mere salary. She picked up the encrypted hard drive, recognizing the specialized military-grade casing. She knew immediately that accessing it would require resources far beyond the casual investigation she had conducted thus far. It felt cold, dense, and utterly sinister in her palm, a silent repository of ruin. But it was the photograph that held the true, final, stunning revelation, the necessary pattern interrupt that forced her understanding into a completely different orbit. It was a formal portrait, slightly faded, showing David smiling broadly, standing beside another woman, not the idealized, glamorous mistress of her imaginings, but a woman with eyes that mirrored David's own unnerving focus, dressed in the severe, powerful uniform of a high-ranking intelligence officer or a specialized corporate security specialist. Below the image, a small, typed caption read, *D, and events, Project Oversight Team, 2012 *. Vance, the name instantly clicked into place, closing the most infuriating open loop of all. Vance was the name attached to the mysterious, anonymous wire transfer she had tracked in the very first hidden receipt, Dismissed initially as an acronym or a typo, Evance was David's sister. A sibling he had always claimed was estranged and living an unremarkable life in obscurity following a bitter family dispute. The cold realization was not that David was simply a criminal, but that this entire operation was familial, a calculated partnership of high-level treason executed with the flawless cohesion of shared blood and shared purpose. The trips weren't just professional covers. They were necessary logistical steps in a meticulously organized, long-term campaign against market stability, executed not by a lone wolf, but by a sophisticated, networked cell. Eleanor sat back on the cold concrete floor, the air suddenly thick and hard to draw. The shock was profound, but oddly devoid of the hysterical grief she might have expected. This level of betrayal had bypassed the emotional core entirely, striking instead at the fundamental root of reality. She hadn't just been married to a liar. She had been married to a ghost, an elaborately constructed fictional character designed to facilitate his quiet operations. Her life, her marriage, the comfortable home, the shared holidays, all of it had been the most effective camouflage possible, the ultimate domestic shield for secrets that could dismantle entire industries. She opened the black ledger again, running her finger down the carefully logged dates, noticing the pattern of communication breaks. David hadn't just been sending messages. He had been receiving crucial, encrypted instructions hidden in plain sight, utilizing the most common of conduits. The revelation, detailed succinctly in the ledger's appendices under the heading Cipher Protocols, Homebase, was breathtaking in its simplicity and audacity. The coded messages weren't transmitted via burner phones or encrypted emails, but through the mundane, predictable structure of their shared life. Specific library book reservations logged under her name at the local public library, their contents highlighted in a seemingly random pattern to reveal numeric strings. The precise wording used in the recurring weekly grocery order submitted online. The timing of the automatic lawn sprinkler system set to minute deviations. Her daily routines, her unwitting predictability, had been weaponized. She had been the unwitting communications hub for a global network of industrial espionage. The sheer scale of the deception mandated an immediate, decisive response, stripping away the luxury of agonizing indecision. Eleanor knew, with chilling certainty, that the moment David returned and realized the key was missing, or that the Sauternes rack had been moved, her position would transform from inconvenient wife to disposable liability. The cold data in the ledger implicated her, however innocently, in financial crimes that warranted serious attention from multiple international agencies. Her immediate objective was no longer seeking emotional closure, but securing existential survival. She gathered the essential documents, the passport, the pages detailing the financial funneling and, crucially, the section of the ledger explaining the operational protocols and the link to Evance, the hard drive she left, knowing it would be a flashpoint, a complexity that needed professional decryption and would be best left for the authorities to discover once her safety was assured. Her next movements were precise, economical, honed by the months of silent preparation. She went upstairs to the home office, accessing the secure line she had installed months prior, quiet parallel to David's own communication hub. She didn't call the police. Such a massive disclosure required a higher authority, one equipped to handle the geopolitical fallout of corporate treason. She placed a single, encrypted call to the non-emergency contact line of the FBI field office she had identified weeks ago, the office specializing in complex economic crimes. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion, sounding more like a dispatcher relaying critical coordinates than a woman witnessing the collapse of her reality. She identified herself by a code name she had chosen deliberately, ironically, during her planning, the Unseen Witness, and stated clearly that she had definitive evidence regarding Project Chimera and the true identity of the Red Canary operative. She referenced the exact, crucial details from the ledger that would establish immediate credibility, dropping terminology that only high-level investigators would recognize. The response on the other end was immediate and intense, a brief period of stunned silence followed by a rapid-fire assessment of security and protocol. She provided the coordinates of a neutral, public location several states away, demanding a meeting within 12 hours, explicitly refusing to return to the house once she left. This was the climax, not of shouting or violence, but of quiet, absolute severance. She was not leaving in a flurry of broken dishes and tearful accusations. She was executing a tactical withdrawal from a dangerous, compromised theater of operations. In the bedroom, she packed a single, small duffel bag not with clothes, but with the necessary tools for disappearance, cash, a secondary burner phone with preloaded international SIM cards, copies of her own uncompromised identity documents, and a small collection of evidence from the vault. She paused only briefly before the large, ornate mirror, seeing the woman who finally saw everything, a woman stripped clean of romantic illusions, hardened by necessary deceit, yet undeniably free. The fear remained a persistent hum beneath her resolve, but it was now channeled, focused, a propellant rather than a paralyzing force. The house, once the sanctuary of their shared life, now felt like a beautifully decorated cage, and the thought of waiting another moment was intolerable. She walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and paused at the front door. She did not look back. There were no grand gestures, no note, no final act of petty revenge, only the cold, clear sound of the deadbolt clicking into place behind her. The woman who left that night was not Eleanor the wife, but Eleanor the survivor, moving with the measured certainty of someone who understands that the only way to escape a ghost is to become one, too. She drove away in the pre-dawn gloom, the evidence resting heavy on the passenger seat, the weight of the collapsed world replaced by the focused gravity of the future. The secrets had ceased to be David's burden and had become her shield. She knew the consequences would be colossal investigations, arrests, public scandal that would atomize their existence. But she also knew that the truth, when finally seen in its stark, unforgiving entirety, demanded nothing less than a complete, unforgiving dismantling of the lie. The veil was gone. She saw the network, the scale, the profound indifference of the men she had loved, and in that clarity lay her ultimate, cold salvation. The narrative ends here, but the vigilance required to survive the aftermath is the final lesson. The journey ahead was paved with caution and necessity, demanding a lifetime of looking over her shoulder, knowing that a network capable of such elaborate industrial sabotage would not dissolve easily nor forgive quickly. Yet, as the sun began to paint the horizon in fierce streaks of orange and purple, Eleanor felt an exhilarating, sharp clarity that years of comfortable domesticity had suppressed. She had been betrayed into enlightenment. She knew the cost of blindness, and she would never, under any circumstance, allow herself to become the victim of a comfortable lie again. If you wish to know the intricate legal fallout of the Vance operations, the clandestine arrests, and the long, fraught process Eleanor undertook to reclaim her name and future from the debris of her espionage-laden marriage, perhaps we must hear more of this silent warfare.